Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Heisman odds, broke down some of the different things I'm watching, some dark horses to watch, some guys that I don't necessarily love their odds right now, but I do love some other guys, so broke down all of that for you guys. But let's jump into recruiting, and let's get into what a weekend that Oregon had. They absolutely controlled this weekend from start to finish, and in the process kind of put some other teams in the trash can. Let's put it that way. They absolutely dominated some other teams on the recruiting trail this weekend, and frankly, it started this weekend with Dorian Brew, one of the biggest pickups of the entire cycle for Oregon. I believe the number 2 guy in their class, if I'm not mistaken. A very, very talented kid. One of the top one of the top corners, in the entire country. A guy that can genuinely step into that Jabbar Muhammad void at the end of the season and probably play right away. Just a really, really talented kid. Was an Ohio State lean for a very long time. Took an Oregon visit, I believe, last week. I could be wrong about that. I think he took it this past weekend or the weekend before that, and they just turned his head, I suppose. They absolutely made a really good impression, and now Ohio State really has to focus on Trey McNutt in that back end, because if they don't lock him in, that might be an issue, and he was in Eugene this past weekend. So there's got to be a little bit of worry over there in Columbus, because they just lost one of their biggest guys, and one of their other guys might be heading that direction towards Oregon this upcoming week. But the reality is Oregon's just doing incredible things on the recruiting trail, and it didn't stop there by any means. Jordan Davison is a very talented running back, number 5 in the country, 4-star running back, a very, very good player. Held offers from essentially every big school. When you think about running backs, I believe was mainly down to Michigan, Ohio State, and Oregon. Made his decision to go to Oregon. This one's a little bit less surprising than the other one, but the reality is a huge pickup, and Ohio State was definitely after this guy. Michigan was definitely after this guy, so a big-time pickup for the Ducks there. They also got a number 3 tight end in the country, Deshaun Bram, a very, very talented player. 3 of the top 4 guys in Oregon's class right now committed this past weekend. So just a remarkable weekend for Oregon, and this is an elite player at an elite size. He's going to do just incredible things for them, and the way they use tight ends is a thing of beauty over there in Will Stein's offense. So it'll be really awesome to watch all of that unfold. And then they got back over to the defensive side of the ball, adding Josiah Sharma, a very talented 4-star D lineman. He committed to the Ducks, and this was one that seemed like it was going to be Bama or Texas. In fact, when I previewed him on Friday, I believe, didn't even talk about Oregon because they weren't on the list. It was Washington, Alabama, and Texas because he was committed to DeBoer while he was at Washington, and Texas got a crystal ball the day before his decision, but Oregon came in and just stole the party. However they did that, there will obviously be people saying they just cut him a check and that's the way that recruiting works now. If that is, then Oregon's winning the game. Let's just be totally honest. So absolutely huge weekend for Oregon, something that they absolutely wanted to do in this upcoming class, and they're just doing incredible things and kind of blowing even my expectations, which were really high for this class, out of the water. So really, really impressive stuff over there from Dan Lanning. But let's get into the rest of the commitments, because there were tons across every team in the country. Trajan Odom, a very, very talented edge rusher out of North Carolina. He committed to Ohio State this weekend, so not everything was bad for the Buckeyes up in Columbus. This one is a little interesting because sometimes you'll find a player that is an outlier on one of these websites, on one of these recruiting websites, whether it's, he's rated way higher on one or way lower on one. This is one where On3 really likes this kid, and it's not that other sites don't like this kid, but he's not rated nearly as high as he is on On3, so we'll see if they're right. We'll see if this kind of recruiting site war that tends to happen around some of these players goes in On3's direction or everyone else's, but regardless, this is a very talented D lineman, and he's going to be a very good player for them. So very much like this pickup. And then you got Marion Dye, a very talented edge rusher. He committed to Tennessee, a very big pickup for Tennessee. They're kind of continuing to build out that defense and make it one of the best in the country and make it something that Josh Heupel hasn't had there. So it'll be really remarkable to kind of see this develop. Obviously, James Pierce Jr. will be off to the NFL at the end of the year, so they're going to need edge rush help, and it might have to come from a freshman, so maybe Marion Dye is that guy. That was kind of interesting. Did not mean to rhyme there, if I'm being totally honest. Julius Hawley is another guy I want to talk about, a really good edge rusher out of Alpharetta High School in the Atlanta area. He went to Michigan, came off the board, a very talented player. Obviously, Michigan's going to do work on the defensive side of the ball. That's changing no time soon, and when they bring in a kid, you might want to watch them a little bit closer because they've been really, really good about evaluating talent up there the last little bit, and I don't think that's changing anytime soon. But let's move right along here. Malik Washington, the top uncommitted quarterback, at least last week, is no longer that way. He is committed to Miami, a very, very good quarterback, and frankly, I think he might just start right away when he shows up on campus in 2025. I think there is a lot of things happening around Maryland that aren't necessarily moving in the perfect direction for them in the future. You know, a lot of teams coming into that league that might be a little bit above them, a lot of the things just kind of going in the wrong direction for Maryland. But you insert a guy like this, a lot of that stuff can flip around very quickly. So a big time pickup for this team, and I think he's one of those guys that we're going to be talking about in probably in a year's time, frankly, gearing up to start his first game for Maryland. So a very talented player, the top uncommitted quarterback. He came off the board, and now I believe there's only one big-time quarterback that is still on the board. So it'll be fascinating to watch what happens there. But Dijon Lee is another guy I want to talk about, another five-star cornerback that came off the board with Dorian Brew this past week. He's making his way to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and Kalen DeBoer just keeps cooking on the recruiting trail. A lot of people assume that wouldn't be the case. That was always going to be the case. It's Alabama, and they're going to be able to recruit well, and this is just another piece to a class that is just becoming one of the best in the entire country. So really remarkable work from that staff down there. This is one of the biggest pickups they had, and it doesn't feel like they're slowing down anytime soon. Micah Strickland is another very talented cornerback that I want to talk about. He committed to TCU, four-star cornerback, and definitely something that TCU needed as they move into this kind of new era with a lot of teams that they're going to have to battle for some recruiting things that are not going to be ideal. You got to battle a couple of in-state schools now that are in the SEC in Texas and Texas A&M. Not ideal on the recruiting trail, but they're doing just fine over there in Fort Worth. Then we'll get to Florida State. Myron Charles did a great job, a very, very fantastic player on the D-line. Another D-lineman that Texas was after, but Florida State got him. A big-time pickup for the Seminoles. This D-line recruiting class for Texas is not necessarily shaping up the way that the Longhorns would want, and frankly, Bo Davis leaving was absolutely huge for that team. So we'll see how that develops. Obviously, plenty of time in this recruiting cycle, but as of right now, the Texas D-line recruiting is not necessarily where you want it to be if you were a Texas fan. Florida State, though, also got Chase Lofton, a very, very talented tight end, number 2 player in the state of Nebraska, a very, very good player, a long body in that offense, and elite tight end play is no stranger to Florida State fans, so that definitely will continue. A very, very talented player. Another guy I want to touch on is Zay Thomas. Don't have a picture for him here, but he committed last night. He is the first member of the Seminole tribe to commit to Florida State to play football, so a very, very cool moment for him, a very cool moment for Florida State and his family, so very, very awesome all around there. Definitely will be fascinating to watch him play for this team, but I want to get into Penn State and talk about Jeff Enixor, a very, very good 4-star wide receiver. He's now on that Penn State commit list, and that's absolutely huge for them. They need to start bringing in more of these guys, more of these elite-level wide receivers, and I think Andy Kotelnicki and his offense will help with that a ton. So a very talented guy and definitely someone that will probably be playing early on during his time at Penn State because of the need they have at wide receiver. And then finally, a decommitment that happened this weekend. Akeelan Deere, a very, very talented running back, one of the best running backs in the country, decommitted from Ole Miss this weekend. And that kind of continues a little bit of a skid that Ole Miss has had on the recruiting trail. Definitely will be something to watch, but it looks like Bama might be the winner here. To be totally honest, everything has shifted in that direction, and I would not be surprised if Bama got a commitment here pretty soon from this kid. So Kalen DeBoer just continues to do work. The second he showed up in Tuscaloosa, there were questions about recruiting. He has subsided all of those worries for Alabama fans and have created a lot of worries for a ton of other SEC fan bases. But let's get into Oregon here for a second because I knew Oregon was going to be a player. I knew they were going to be a problem on the recruiting trail, you know, the Nike ties and being up in Eugene and everything that is going right for that program. I knew that they were going to be a player. I didn't know they were going to be able to stuff big-time teams in the locker and over one weekend, whether it was Texas or Ohio State or Alabama. They took some teams to the woodshed this weekend and did some really, really incredible things. And we can have a conversation about the way that they're going about recruiting. We can have a conversation about the way that they're leveraging NIL. the game is the game, and they're winning a lot of these battles that they're going to have to win to be a elite team. So absolutely huge weekend for them. Definitely will be a fascinating thing to watch. And usually the teams that dominate the summer months are the teams that end up at the very top of the list at the end of the year. So far, Oregon, Bama, Georgia, Ohio State have all dominated these couple of weeks and probably will continue to dominate, and you will find them towards the top. So it'll be fascinating to see what Oregon can do. They want to pick up a commitment from DeCorian Moore here pretty soon. Texas does have a lead there, but as we just saw with Josiah Sharma, that doesn't necessarily mean too much to Oregon. So it'll be fascinating to watch this develop. I definitely think it'll be a pretty crazy couple of weeks here. I think there's going to be a ton of big-time guys that come off the board. 6 of the top 10 and 9 of the top 15 recruits in the country are uncommitted right now. So there's going to be a lot of stuff that happens, whether it's, David Sanders committing and being the top offensive tackle off the board, or some of the quarterbacks maybe flipping. I know Julian Lewis is it feels like he's hanging on by a thread on that USC class. So it'll be fascinating to watch this develop, but it feels like over the next couple of weeks, the top 5 will really start to take shape, and we'll figure out who had a fantastic year in recruiting and who didn't necessarily have the year that they were expecting. It will be fascinating to watch that unfold, but let's take our last break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Monday questions. We're going to get into a kind of an SEC edition. We're going to break down some different things, break down what is the biggest game in the SEC schedule, as Quinn Ewers alluded to a little bit earlier. We'll talk about some of the highly touted quarterbacks and who might just disappoint this upcoming year. And then we're going to talk about Missouri and why, frankly, we haven't been talking about them a little bit more. So we'll break down all of that right after this, so stick with us.